Waffles in the morning, syrup sweet and slow. Golden stacks are rising, sunrise in the glow. Sticky choice so grand, breakfast on demand. Smile and take my hand in Waffle Wonderland.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Wafflecast. Today, we're going to be talking about the modern tournament that just took place at the Spotlight Series in Utrecht, Netherlands. So, we're going to be looking at this and kind of breaking things down, but I think it's cool that we get where we got one tournament with the regional championship, where it was an open deck tournament. Then we get the Spotlight Series, which day one was a closed deck list, meaning you had no clue what your opponent was playing, and you just had to kind of take what you got in your opening hands and kind of figure out if you had the best start or anything like that. But then when you got to day two, then it became an open deck list tournament, which now you kind of get to see what you're up against most of the time that you're playing. You get to see their deck list, see if they put any secret tech, anything like that. But I think this is a good thing to look at here, right? We had a completely open deck tournament. Then we had a closed deck, open deck tournament, which gives us a little bit more of a, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like a variance of how good Breach is in certain types of environments, right? Fully open deck list, closed deck list, things like that. So we're going to get into this a little bit because I wrote down a bunch of notes, because as much as they did a good job covering the event, right? I watched the event. They did a really good job with the commentators, Simon Nielsen, Arnie, and Yuza, and I forget the lady's name right now. I'm blanking. But the four of them did a great job covering the event. The thing that I wish they would have done a little bit more of is give you a little bit more breakdown and imagery of the meta. And they did that for day one, right? So let's look at this picture here that we've got. So they did a meta breakdown for day one. I scoured. I could not find a meta breakdown for day two. And I could not find a top 8 bracket or anything like that. Again, I'm kind of doing this on quick turnaround, trying to get this out as soon as possible. But I did do a lot of notes and research through Melee GG and other things. So as you can see here, Teamer Breach, majority of the field, 12% of the field, which wasn't the highest percentage, but it's a good amount. Almost 200 out of the 1,500 decks that showed up were Teamer. The Teamer Breach decks. Then you had right behind that, like literally right behind it, was Orzhov Blink. And I think it's funny that they're 1 and 2, because I'll get into why it's funny later. But then you got Eldrazi Ramp and Boros Energy bringing up 3 and 4 at 10%, almost 11%, and 8%. Then you had Domain Zune and Amulet Titan, coming up. And then Dimir Murktide, Dimir Meal.
What did he say?
Anyways, words are hard. Hollow One, and this was interesting. Out of 1,500 players, right, 613 of the field was other. So that classified as a lot of different decks. If you go through Melee GG, you can see all the different archetypes. One of the new archetypes, I think it's kind of an evolution of the Yawgmoth deck, I think. I didn't dive into it too much, was the Samwise Gamgee deck. It was a combo deck. That was an interesting deck, and there's a couple others, right? And so when you play a closed deck list tournament like this, let's go ahead and get this off the screen, right? When you play a closed tournament, again, words are hard. When you play a closed deck list tournament, it is much easier to bring a rogue deck in to the tournament because they don't see what you're doing. And you have a slight advantage against your opponent when it comes to rogue decking in a closed deck tournament. When you're in an open deck tournament, it's a lot harder to have an advantage with rogue decking because they get to see everything you're playing. So yes, you bring a rogue deck and they have to look at it and kind of figure out what it's trying to do, but really good professional players can look at a deck and be like, oh, that's your win condition. Oh, I see what you're doing. So it's not as big of an advantage. They talked about in the tournament where certain players were playing and they'd be like, oh, the Death Shadow deck looks a lot like this deck. And so the opponent's going to think that they're playing this way, and really the opponent's going to come around and blindside them with this card. So that's where I like the closed deck tournaments, right? Because you can blindside your opponents, and that's where you get that slight advantage. Now, when you get into day 2, everything was, all bets are off. It's open deck list. Everyone can see your shenanigans, all that. But I still think it's still a good tournament, right? And the one thing I wish it was is that it wasn't open deck list on day 2. Old GPs, same thing. GPs were closed deck list day 1 and day 2. You didn't know what your opponent was playing unless you somehow got information from a buddy who played against somebody and was like, oh yeah, that person's playing Tron or whatever. So I feel like doing full closed brings a lot more element to the game for the rogue deck builders. But it was good to see that a lot of people were trying to play things other than the 5 top decks, right? There was a lot of different, Mono Green Brood Scale was a good deck that was listed as an other deck, but it actually did perform okay for being another deck. So I want to go into the top 8, right? So top 8, we had an Eldrazi Ramp, we had a Black-White Blink, Amulet Titan, Mono Green Blue.
You do so. You want.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Brood Scale, that's a meme. 2 Teamer Breaches, Death Shadows. I think it was a Grixis Death Shadow deck, and a Hollow One deck made it into the top 8. Now I think it's funny that the top 2 decks that were submitted were Teamer Breach and Black-White Blink. Guess what the finals was? Teamer Breach and Black-White Blink. This Black-White Blink deck has really come on strong in the last couple months, or I would probably say in the last month. But Black-White Blink took it down. As you can see in the final match, it went to 3 games, and you can watch it on YouTube. I might put a link down below for the channel for the Spotlight series, but it came down to basically the Black-White deck had the hate cards to stop Breach from doing its thing with the Magistrate and a Thalia, basically making it more to where you got to pay 1 for your opals and you can't cast anything other than from your hand. So it made it really hard for Breach to go off. And then they ended up playing a Baelmerk Liege. The Haunt of the Baelmerk, and putting on the clock and was like, you're dead in 2 turns unless you figure this out. So that basically how the cookie crumbled for Teamer Breach. But in the end, Teamer Breach still had a good showing. Again, I couldn't find a day 2 breakdown, but I went through because I think it was like 500 and something players made it into the day 2. And out of the top 200 decks, right, you had 37 Teamer Breach make it into the top 200, 13 Amulet Titan, 23 White-Black Blink, 3 of the Mono Green Brood Scale, 28 of Energy Variant, Mardu, Boros, whatever, 4 Hollow One, 19 Eldrazi Ramp, 6 Murktide, 10 Zoo, and 57 other. So out of 200, Other and Teamer Breach were the top 2 decks to make it into the top 200 there. In the top 100 decks, 21 were Teamer Breach. And then 25 was Other, but the closest to Teamer Breach was White-Black Blink at 15. So White-Black Blink and Teamer Breach had really good showings in the top 100. I think Breach and Blink both had, don't quote me on this, but I think it was anywhere between 6 to 8 each in the top 32. So that's a pretty good showing. So like I said, Teamer Breach is still the best deck. I strongly believe it's still the best deck. As you can see, people are trying to build decks to continue to hate out Breach, and yet it still puts up good numbers. Even through a closed deck tournament, an open deck tournament, it's still putting up relatively decent numbers. I wouldn't be surprised on March 31st if we see Breach banned. Now, I do have a Dark Horse card that after watching this tournament, I didn't think about this the last time I put out a video on Modern, right? But there is a card that I'm looking at going, that could possibly be banned. That could be the card that gets banned and or is banned with Breach. Or if they don't ban Breach, which I think is wildly not going to happen. But if they don't ban Breach, I think that this card, Urza's Saga, could actually be banned. And the reason why I'm going to say Urza's Saga is because it's played in a majority of decks now. It is such a very viable card to be played. It's similar to playing like, let's say you're playing like Ghost Quarters or Demolition Field or Fountain Port. You know, you're going to play those cards because they do something and they tap for mana. Urza Saga does the same thing. It finds you... a lot of times it finds the hate cards to stop Breach. It finds Amulet Titan. It finds a lot of different... It finds the Brute Scale combo piece. Like, there's so many things that this card does as a utility. So I wouldn't be shocked if Urza Saga gets on the chopping block as well. Now, I don't think they'll ban it, but I think there's a very strong chance that it could get looked at as a potential card to be banned. I think what they may do with it is they'll keep it on the watch list when they banned Breach and see how prevalent it becomes or stays, if it stays relevant, to continue with the strength of showing in the decks that it's showing up in. So I would say be on the lookout for Urza Saga getting the potential ban hammer and or being on the watch list if it doesn't get banned. But after watching this tournament, I was like, whoa, that's something I didn't think about, was possibly Urza Saga. Because it is a very good card. And I mean, the One Ring was starting to pop up in every deck, and they banned it because they're like, it's too powerful. I'm not saying Urza Saga is on the level of the One Ring, but it is a very, very powerful card. But anyways, that's what I got for you guys on this tournament. I have already booked my flights and everything for Indy, so I will see you guys out there at Indy if you're going to be playing in that Modern tournament. So I've been, pouring over cards and everything, looking at some stuff and keeping up on Modern because I'm going to go play in a big Modern tournament. So I want to stay up to date on what the decks are, what the top decks are, what I might possibly want to play, things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what the March 31st banning brings. I honestly think it's going to be a Breach banning, unless some craziness happens. But yeah, those are my thoughts. That's your guys's. That's what I could find informational wise. If you guys have found some of the things that I can't find, which is a meta breakdown for day 2, and you got a link for it, please comment it down below. I'd love to see it, to get some really good numbers, and other people might want to see it too. Or maybe you got some other information to share. Please comment that down below. Put a link down below to it. But with that, guys, I'm gonna leave you guys like I always leave you. Why can't I talk today? Anyways, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day. And as always, stay syrupy, my friends.
Waffles in the morning, syrup sweet and slow. Golden stacks are rising.